Well, good afternoon, everybody, and you're very welcome to today's webinar. My name's Oliver McKerney, and I'm a policy manager in the Department of Education. I'm involved in the developing policy for literacy and numeracy. I'm also involved in the wider curriculum or reform of the Northern Ireland curriculum. So we're the ones that are hosting these seminars or these webinars. Could I just do a few bits of housekeeping here? Everybody's microphones are off and the cameras are off. It's just to make sure that the webinar runs okay. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in a Q&A section there, and we'll pick them up at the end. Today's session will maybe run 35-40 minutes, and then there'll be time for question and answers after that. All the webinars are going to be recorded and uploaded on the DE website, and if you've signed up for these webinars, you will get an email telling you when they're uploaded. We haven't uploaded the first one yet. We should upload them hopefully in the next week or so. And as I said, the first session isn't online, so I'll just pass over to Geraldine then. So, okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted you've come back. All I can say is today's speaker is obviously very, very popular. So Hamish, well done before we even start. Folks, I hope you had a good half term and you had the opportunity to rest and take a bit of time out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to visit two slides from the first session which occurred 2 weeks ago. And that just to sort of contextualize what we're doing today. You're familiar from the first webinar. Sorry, I just want to get it off the screen. That we already have the literacy framework in place, and hopefully you've had an opportunity to maybe even just glance at it, and you know that these the framework and the micro briefs and the webinars that we have planned are all in sync with each other. They do not stand alone. So as Oliver says, in the next couple of weeks, the micro briefs and the webinars will continue to roll out, and the recordings will be on the Department of Education website. So 2 weeks ago, I gave a sort of a brief background to the science behind the teaching of literacy and the learning that goes on there. And that was really to set a context so that when you are not engaging with colleagues and peers and maybe with the research immediately, that you are able to make discerning decisions going forward, and that you and your colleagues can speak the one language, because very often miscommunication happens not by intention, but because terminology can mean one thing maybe from a couple of years back, and it means something different now. I just want to let you know, for those who aren't maybe familiar with the 8 webinars we have lined up. And next week, or sorry, in 2 weeks' time, on the 3rd of March, Ryan Leishon from Victoria Primary School in Ballyhalbert is going to be our host, looking at how we connect phonics and spelling instruction throughout the primary school and beyond. So for those of you who are in post-primary, you're very welcome here today too, because I know some of you are struggling with issues that used to be primary school issues that have now kind of ricocheted up into post-primary. So you're very welcome. I also want to maybe bring to your attention one of the infographics that is right at the centre of this, certainly at the centre of the literacy framework. So you're probably quite familiar with Scarborough's reading rope, and just to say that with the reading rope today, Hamish is going to be predominantly, but not exclusively, looking at word recognition, because when you look at the rope and how it binds together in service of becoming a skilled reader, when you pay attention to one aspect of the rope on the left-hand side, which whatever bit that might be, other parts of the rope get tangled up together because it is a very complex issue to teach literacy. So none of these are really truly being taught alone or standalone. So Hamish is going to really look at the word recognition piece, but he's also going to touch on oral reading fluency, as well as you will understand very quickly that other aspects at the language comprehension end of the rope will be coming into play also. And just to finish on the point that all of these aspects of the rope are in service of comprehension, of reading comprehension. So that means when we introduce children to print, we want them to understand it in the complex way in which it is put together. So we don't teach any of these aspects simply to teach them. We teach them in service of that dynamic cultivation of ongoing understanding. So on that note, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I want to introduce you to Hamish and to say, Hamish, thank you. I have seen your presentation and boy, folks, are you in for a treat today. Hamish is going to introduce himself. In the meantime, I'm going to keep an eye on the Q&A and Hamish, welcome.
Great, thank you, Geraldine. So I'm a P4 teacher and literacy coordinator at Kings Park School here in Newton Abbey. I've been here for about 7 years now, but before that, I was an assistant principal. You can probably tell by my accent, an assistant principal in Australia. So what I do really love, though, is talking about literacy, and I'm really looking forward to sharing this journey with you. So I'll just put up my presentation now. Okay, and that should be me. Okay, so when I was given the title, Establishing Foundational Skills Through Explicit Systematic Instruction, I have to admit, I thought that is a bit of a mouthful. So thank you to everyone who saw that and still decided to join us here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try to do my best to unpack what that actually looks like in a real school and how we've gone about it. There's also going to be a recurring theme through this presentation, and that is explicit instruction. So what it actually looks like day to day and the difference that it's made to the children at our school. And look, I do want to be really clear from the start too, and that is that we are not a lighthouse school for literacy. I've been asked to present because we made some really deliberate decisions around literacy. We're doing some things much better than we used to, but we're still very much learning too. I also know that there's many schools that are either considering going down this path or at the very early stages of exploring it. So my hope is that by sharing our journey and doing so honestly, that'll be particularly helpful if you're at that point of asking questions and maybe weighing things up. And if you're further along your journey, I still hope that there's something in our experience that maybe resonates or is useful in your own context. So today I'm going to talk about our school context because context does matter. I'll explain why we changed, why we moved towards explicit systematic phonics instruction, what that looks like in practice from P1 to P4. I'm also going to touch on some of the challenges and the criticisms that we faced along the way there. I also want to talk about what we've learned through implementation and where we're heading next. And finally, I want to leave you with some practical strategies that we've learned that teachers could take away and potentially use tomorrow in their classrooms. So with that in mind, I'll just give you a bit of context about our school. So as I said, my school is Kings Park Primary School. It's a controlled primary school in Newton Abbey, County Antrim. We've got 273 pupils, 34% free school meals, 26% SEN, and we've got a growing ethnic diversity. So we've got 20 home languages. What we do have too is we've got children with varying levels of English proficiency, and that's across every year group in the school. And although our percentage of free school meals it's relatively low compared to some schools, what we do have, we've got pupils from a range of socioeconomic backgrounds, including some that experience significant disadvantage. What we do have is our biggest asset too, and it's always been our teachers. We've got teachers who they care deeply about the children in front of them, and I think that's reflected in the very high attendance we have. But what we didn't have was a whole school approach to literacy that was founded on the current research. So we needed a new vision for our literacy. We needed a shared and consistent approach to teaching it. So coming out of COVID lockdowns, we were also noticing a drop in our literacy data, and it was responding to this data that was really the catalyst for our change. At the time, COVID was part of that conversation, and to an extent that was understandable too, that there'd been disrupted schooling. There was also industrial action happening, and that added another layer of complexity. So we had this real tension between wanting to change and feeling constrained by what sometimes felt like outside influences. We also didn't know much about the science of reading at the time. We didn't know about the theory of the reading brain and all this other great research that was happening around the world. So the reason that we moved towards explicit systematic phonics was actually quite simple. What we were doing, it wasn't working well enough for all of our children, particularly those who found learning to read the most difficult. So like many schools, we had a group of pupils who seemed to learn to read almost regardless of what we did. We also had a significant number of children who weren't making the progress we'd expect, even though we had teachers that were working incredibly hard. So over time, it did become clear that our approach, it relied too heavily on children picking things up implicitly. So that'd be through exposure and repetition, rather than being taught the code of reading directly and systematically. And as we engaged more with the research, it helped us to understand why some children thrived and others struggled. And we now know that for many children, especially those without that strong literacy support at home, we need to be much more explicit. So explicit systematic phonics, it offered us a way to be clearer, more consistent, and more equitable in how we teach reading. It also removed the guesswork for children and teachers alike, and it gave us a shared framework and language across the school. So in many ways for us, this shift was about knowing better and then doing better, and using what we now understand about how children learn to read to shape our practice more deliberately. But before I talk about the research or the program that we chose, I think it's really important to be clear about what we actually mean when we talk about foundational skills for literacy, because that understanding, it did shape our decisions. So when we talk about foundational skills, we're talking about those building blocks that children need to become confident, capable readers and writers. So these are the skills that allow children to read accurately and fluently, to understand what they're reading, and to express their ideas clearly through speaking and writing. So that foundation includes phonemic awareness and phonics, so understanding how the sounds work in spoken language and how those sounds map to letters. But it doesn't stop there. Children also need to develop fluency so that reading becomes automatic rather than effortful. And that's also happening alongside vocabulary and comprehension so that the reading is meaningful. So explicit systematic phonics, it plays this critical role in building this foundation because it teaches children the reading and spelling code clearly, step by step, and in a planned, cumulative way. It removes the guesswork and it gives children access to the same core knowledge. And that's what I mean by it being equitable for our children. At the same time, though, high quality instruction, it doesn't rely on phonics alone. So those skills like fluency, vocabulary, comprehension, they need to be taught deliberately and alongside phonics. It can't be left to chance. And it's when these elements, when they're working together, it's when children are far more likely to become confident readers who not only can read, but who can understand and enjoy what they read. So the research, once we were clear on what we meant by those foundational skills, the next step, the next question for us, it was a real simple one. it was, what does the research say? What's the most effective way to build those foundations for all children? And to answer that, we took a really deliberate approach. So we engaged with published research. We looked closely at our own school data and the data from other schools. We spoke to colleagues locally. We observed programs in action. We listened to practitioners and researchers working in the space. But for me personally, that included engaging with resources like the Solar Story podcast. I did find it quite confronting, particularly as a former reading recovery teacher. And I will be honest, it was uncomfortable. It challenged things that I believed and practiced for many years. And I know that there may be people listening today who feel some of that same discomfort, but that's completely understandable. And this isn't about blame or embarrassment. And for us, it was about recognizing that we learned something new and then deciding what we were going to do with that information. So we didn't just rely on one source either. We saw the same messages coming through the research, and that's what gave us the confidence to change. If you are beginning this journey yourself, there are some really accessible starting points. The 5 from 5 website, it does offer a lot of high quality free professional learning. The Reading League website, and there's also researchers whose work is well worth engaging with, such as Jennifer Buckingham, Pamela Snow, and of course, Geraldine here, who's been doing a huge amount of work in this space locally. I also think it's important to acknowledge that Northern Ireland has traditionally taken a cautious, measured approach to educational change. In many ways, that has been a real strength. It's helped us to avoid jumping on initiatives or fads that haven't always served our pupils well. But in this case, the body of research, often referred to as a science of reading, it isn't a trend or a program. It's a well-established, well-researched body of evidence, and it's been building for decades. So for us, engaging with that research, it wasn't about doing something new or fashionable. It was about responding thoughtfully to what the evidence had been telling us for quite some time. And when we looked at that research on effective teaching more broadly, what really stood out was how closely it aligned with explicit instruction. So many of us will be familiar with the work around high impact teaching. So things like teacher clarity, modeling, deliberate practice, checking for understanding and feedback. And these are exactly the features that sit at the heart of explicit systematic phonics instruction. So it wasn't about introducing something completely new. It was about being more consistent with what we already know works well in our classrooms. And when we looked honestly at our previous practice, we realized that many of these features weren't happening consistently. And this approach helped us tighten that up. So not just in reading, but in how we think about teaching all literacy content. And I do want to say this really carefully, because most schools are teaching phonics. We certainly were. What's different now is the level of precision and consistency. So nothing is assumed, and practice is tightly aligned to what's been taught. And many schools are using explicit teaching methods as well. But very often that step-by-step instruction is happening later, usually in SEN settings or withdrawal groups. And that's once children have already started to struggle. So by that point, we're already in catch-up mode. So what we've tried to shift that explicit instruction forward. So instead of waiting for children to fall behind and then intervening, we're asking, what if we built that safety net from the very beginning? What if the clear modeling, the structured practice, the cumulative teaching, all of that was happening for every child every day? So the goal for us isn't to eliminate support. Some children will always need additional help. But what we want those withdrawal groups to get smaller and smaller over time. Not because we've removed support, but because fewer children are going to need it in the first place. So for us, this hasn't been about being proactive rather than, sorry, it's been about being proactive rather than reactive. We're trying to put the strongest foundations in place early. We're trying to give every child the best possible start. We also had to be really honest about capacity in our school. Our teachers simply don't have the time to design a carefully sequenced research-aligned scope and sequence, or time to write detailed teaching notes backed by research. And that's all while trying to ensure consistency across year groups. We don't have time for that, not on top of everything else we do. So using that well-researched, authored program, it's meant that work's already been done and done well. So it's allowed us to focus on teaching and responding to pupils. So just to summarize, when choosing Explicit systematic phonics program, there were some non-negotiables for us. From researching different programs, we knew that any program must have alignment with evidence. So there had to be a strong research base behind it, with the outcomes and results available independently. All publishers claim their program is effective. We wanted to see that evidence. We wanted it to have that clear cumulative scope and sequence. So the research, it consistently points towards reading skills being taught best in a planned sequential way. It was also important for us that the program had decodable readers that were closely aligned to that sequence. And that was so that children could practice exactly what they'd been taught. We were also looking for programs that modeled explicit instruction really clearly, and often this did happen through scripting or scripted programs. And these programs are designed this way for a reason. I will come back to this later when I talk about fidelity and our experience with implementation. While phonics was a priority for us too, we were very clear that a program couldn't just focus on phonics in isolation. We needed to support the development of those full sets of foundational reading skills, so the phonemic awareness, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, so that decoding sat within a broader approach. And finally, we wanted something that would make teachers' lives easier, not harder. And that meant high quality lesson materials, clear guidance, and support that reduced planning load and allowed teachers to focus on teaching. So our school decided on a program called Initiate, and I want to be really clear, this isn't about promoting one program over another. Our decision, it wasn't about the name on the resource, it was about the research and the practice behind it. So we were looking for something that was explicit, systematic, cumulative, grounded in research, with that clear scope and sequence. And we chose a program that met our criteria and ticked those boxes. But I know that there are many systematic phonics options available here in the UK that schools can choose from, and from overseas as well. The key is selecting something that fits your context while staying true to that evidence around systematic explicit instruction. What we've learned though on this journey is that it's the preparation and the teaching practice and the quality of that implementation that matter most, not the label on the program. So before I talk in more detail about what this looks like in classrooms, I want to acknowledge that this work sits alongside everything else that schools are managing. So the workload, the time pressures, the staffing challenges, all those competing priorities, it's not easy. And this kind of change, it does ask a lot of schools. And one of the biggest things we've learned is that this work, it doesn't happen by accident. So principals, if you do want explicit systematic phonics embedded, and if you wanted it embedded meaningfully across your school, literacy coordinators do need the time. They need that protected time to engage with research, to explore programs that fit your context, and to think really carefully about that implementation. These are really big decisions. They deserve to be made thoughtfully, and leadership does need to be actively involved. And for literacy coordinators, this work does need a clear plan. That means being clear about what you're trying to achieve, understanding where your school currently is, and being prepared to have those conversations with leadership. Depending on where you are on the journey, it might mean deepening your understanding of the science of reading. It might mean researching programs or supporting staff to refine practice. We've been really fortunate that our school leadership supported this work and engaged seriously with the research, and that's made a real difference to how effectively and how quickly we've been able to implement this change. So we first implemented the program in the 24-25 school year, and we started in P1, and that's because it made it easier to grow that practice upwards through the school. And we also implemented it in both P4 classes, and we saw this as dipping our toes into these science of reading practices. In P1, it means daily phonics lessons that they're carefully structured and cumulative. So the lessons include oral language, phonemic awareness, and decoding, and that's right from the very beginning. The concepts are reviewed regularly, and new learning is introduced in small, manageable steps. The teacher's modelling clearly, and that is often using a script, so that children know exactly what they're learning and how to apply it. Decodable readers are used early and consistently, and whole class participation is key. So we use strategies like choral responses and whiteboards to ensure that every child is thinking and responding, and they're giving that teacher that immediate feedback. One of the biggest shifts for us has been that our children are reading from print much earlier than before, and they're not memorizing or guessing. They're applying the code that they're being taught. So just briefly, this does look different depending on your role. So for teachers, it means having a clear lesson structure, consistent language, and the confidence that what you're teaching today builds directly on what was taught yesterday. For literacy coordinators, it means monitoring fidelity to the program. You're supporting pacing and using data to identify where children and staff may need additional support. And for principals, it means protecting that literacy time. You're supporting staff through change and making this a visible priority across the school. One of the key differences with this approach is that phonics is no longer taught in isolation. So in the past, many of us taught a phonics lesson, perhaps using something like Jolly Phonics, and then asked children to read an unrelated PM Reader or Oxford Reading Tree book. And the phonics lesson and the reading book weren't necessarily connected. With an explicit, systematic approach, everything is aligned. The sounds taught in the phonics lesson are the same sounds that children meet in the text they read. And that means that children are practicing decoding the code they're being taught rather than relying on pictures, memory, or context to get them through a book. This is a real shift in teaching practice. It was for us. It's where reading becomes a chance to practice taught skills, not to cope with untaught ones. And as I said before, it's not that phonics wasn't happening. It's that now the instruction and the reading practice, they're deliberately joined up. It's all very intentional. I find it really useful to show a concrete example here. And this is a decodable text that we would use in P1. And it clearly demonstrates what we mean by that systematic and explicit instruction. So every sound in this text, it's already been taught and practiced, and the text only contains taught sounds and words, so nothing extra, nothing unexpected. It's also cumulative, so children aren't just using the most recent sound they've learned, they're drawing on everything they've been taught up to that point. So each new text builds carefully on what came before. So before children ever read a text like this independently, similar texts are read together as a class. And that whole class first approach, it means that children hear fluent reading, they see the decoding modelled, and they practice together through modelled, echo, or choral reading. And it's only after that shared practice that children move into their reading groups. And at that point, the purpose isn't on performance, it's about practice. So children are practicing skills they already know, and it's happening in a really supported environment, rather than them being asked to cope with something that's really unfamiliar. And that distinction, it's been a really important shift for us in P1. But it's P2 and P3. The approach doesn't change, but the complexity does. So the routines, the language, the structure, they all stay consistent. Because we are using a scripted program, children aren't relearning how lessons work each year, and that consistency, it helps reduce that cognitive load, and it allows them to focus on the new learning. So at this stage, we introduce features like vowel digraphs, two-syllable words and compound words, always doing so explicitly, always cumulatively. And these features, they're taught and practiced orally first. We're revisiting them across several lessons, and only then do they appear in those decodable texts. So when pupils read, nothing is unfamiliar. They're applying what they've already rehearsed. And by the time we reach P4, reading looks different again, and that is appropriate. Many children are ready for a broader range of texts, so decodable readers are no longer the main classroom text. That said, if a pupil still needs decodable support, we absolutely use it. It does remain a tool. But in P4, we place a much greater emphasis on fluency, comprehension, morphology. So we continue explicit phonics and spelling instruction, but we also help children understand how words are built and how those spelling patterns connect. Alongside that, the strategies like the modeled reading, the echo reading, the choral reading, and pair reading, they remain important because fluency and comprehension still need deliberate teaching. So the progression from P2 to P4, it isn't about abandoning phonics. It's about building on secure foundations and widening the reading experience. I want to be really clear too that this isn't about throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Schools are full of level text. Our school is full of level text, and they absolutely still have a place. So the shift for us has been about when we use them, not whether we use them at all. So once children are secure with the initial phonics code and beginning to tackle things like vowel digraphs and multisyllabic words, level readers can be introduced, and you're broadening their reading experience. You're building that vocabulary, that stamina and enjoyment. But at the same time, those decodable texts don't suddenly disappear. They remain important, and you're using them for teaching more complex aspects of the code. So features such as split digraphs, additional vowel digraphs and trigraphs. So children often move between both types of texts, each serving a different purpose. The key difference is that decodable texts, they come first to build the foundations, and level texts follow once children have the tools to read them more independently. So we're not banning books. We're still using leveled readers. We're still using rich texts. We're still using your favorite picture books. We're just being more intentional about timing and purpose. And I'm very aware that I've just used words like digraphs and trigraphs, and some people might be thinking, oh, that sounds a bit technical. But when you use an explicit systematic phonics program, that's the language that the children use too. So we don't shy away from it. We teach the terminology clearly, and the children, they rise to it, so that they're absolutely capable of using it confidently. One of the biggest things that we have learned along the way was the importance of preparation. We definitely should have spent more time building teachers' understanding of the science of reading. Not just saying this is what we're doing, but really unpacking the practices behind it, and being really honest too about why some of the things that we'd done for years weren't actually working as well as we thought. And I can't emphasize that point enough. Preparation is key. We also underestimated how uncomfortable change can feel. So asking teachers to let go of familiar approaches and to trust something new, it is a big ask. So it's really reminded us about how important that ongoing support and reassurance is, especially at a time when there's already so much change happening across education. Protecting daily literacy time was another lesson. We always knew it mattered, but in practice, it has meant some real timetable juggling to make sure that it actually happened every day. And finally, we learned that even with a scripted program, consistency, it doesn't just happen. It takes time to embed. So it's about finding that balance. It's about finding that balance between giving teachers space to build confidence and providing enough support to keep everything moving in that right direction. So what we found, even in a relatively short space of time, is that our children's fluency and comprehension have improved significantly. And that's been one of the most obvious shifts for us. And that's both anecdotally in classrooms and when we look at the data we have. Last year, after 9 months of implementing these explicit teaching practices in P4, pupils made an average increase of 8 standardized points on their PTE scores. So that certainly made us sit up and take notice too. But we're finding that children are reading more confidently with greater accuracy, and they're able to talk about what they've read with a much deeper understanding. We know that it is still early days, and we know that this work is ongoing. But for us, this improvement in fluency and comprehension, it's been genuinely encouraging. Implementing a new program like this, particularly a scripted one, it definitely comes with its challenges, and it's really important to acknowledge those openly. So it's too scripted, and that's probably the most common concern that you hear, that it's too scripted. And there's a fear that scripting removes autonomy or can make lessons feel really rigid. What we've come to realize is that the script doesn't replace teacher expertise. It's there to support it. So it reduces the cognitive load for teachers around what to teach and how to explain it. So we found this is really helpful, especially when staff confidence varies. And that frees teachers up to focus on what really matters. So watching pupils, checking for understanding, adjusting the pace, and responding in the moment. It's also helped us to move beyond having just pockets or silos of excellent practice. So instead of just a few classrooms doing it really well, we're seeing greater consistency across year groups. And it's that consistency that makes a real difference for children. One program can't meet the needs of every child, and this criticism is absolutely true. No single program will ever be the answer to everything. What this approach has done for us, though, it's strengthened the quality and consistency of teaching across the school. So in the past, we were probably doing a good job for many children, but there's still a significant group who weren't making that progress we wanted, and that's despite everyone working incredibly hard. Now, because that instruction, it's clearer, more structured, and more consistent, far more children are keeping up and succeeding within their classroom learning. And when children do need additional support, it's much easier to identify that early and then respond quickly. So for us, this isn't about claiming that a program solves everything. It doesn't. It's about putting strong foundations in place for as many children as possible. And we call it stacking the odds in their favor and giving them that strong foundation. Another criticism or concern that we've heard is that it's restrictive and boring for pupils. And if we're honest, it's something that we probably wondered ourselves at the beginning, and it was probably my number one concern. But I think that we do have to reframe the thinking around that. And what can look repetitive to adults, to teachers, it can often be reassuring and confidence building to our children. So we found that predictability, that structure, it can help reduce anxiety, and it can allow children to focus on the learning itself. And the repetition in these programs, it's not accidental. It's very, very deliberate, and it's what helps the learning stick. So what we found is that when the lessons, when they're delivered with pace, clarity, warmth, and enthusiasm, then children are engaged, and most importantly, they're experiencing success, and that success is really motivating for the children and for us. So for us, the biggest shift hasn't just been about choosing a program. It's been committing to deliver it consistently and well. So as we look ahead, one of the really helpful parts of this journey, it was having the opportunity to be observed by Geraldine and by Dr. Jennifer Buckingham when they came and they visited our school. During that visit, we deliberately shared practice from the 3 classes who had been engaged in explicit systematic phonics for the longest period of time. And the feedback that we did receive on those lessons, it was encouraging, and it gave us that reassurance that we were moving in the right direction. But at the same time, we're very aware that when that visit took place, many other classes in our school, they'd only been implementing these practices for a really short period of time. So our focus now is it's very much on giving those teachers the space and time to embed the program properly before rushing in to make any changes. Alongside that, we do know that the importance of follow-up, so continuing to support staff, checking in, and continuing to refine that practice over time. Another key step for us is continuing to grow these approaches further up the school, so into primary 5, 6, and 7. And that's because we don't want that consistency that the children experience in those early years just suddenly dropping away. I want to finish by talking about a reading practice that's still really common in classrooms, and that is round robin reading. And it's where children, they take turns, often reading aloud in a circle while everyone else listens. And this approach, it's usually really well intentioned. Teachers are trying to hear children read. They're trying to keep an eye on progress and manage those groups efficiently. Honestly, for many of us, it's how we were taught or how we've always seen reading done. But when you look at reading through the lens of explicit systematic instruction, this round robin reading, it really starts to feel like a poor fit. So in an explicit systematic phonics approach, the goal is clear modeling followed by lots of supported successful practice. Children really they need to hear that fluent reading. They need to be able to practice decoding accurately, and they need to build that confidence before they're asked to read independently. And round robin reading, it does very little of that. So if you are looking for one immediate change that could increase reading volume and quality in your classroom, I'd start by really rethinking round robin reading. For the child reading aloud, that cognitive load, it's huge. So they're decoding, they're trying to keep the place of where they're up to in their book, and they're often worrying about performing, so performing in front of the teacher and their peers. And for everyone else, that engagement can be really low. So many are just waiting for their turn. Some might be following with their finger, rehearsing their own bit, or switching off altogether. So because in reality, most pupils get very little meaningful reading practice. What's often missing in this approach is the modeling. So the children, they don't get to consistently hear that fluent reading. So rather than abandoning shared reading, what we've used, we've we've just become much more intentional about how we structure it. So we've shifted towards strategies like modeled reading, echo reading, and choral reading. And these strategies, they fit naturally with explicit systematic phonics because the teacher models first and then the children practice immediately in a supported way. So in reading groups, your modeled reading, it lets the teacher demonstrate fluid, accurate reading first. And that's so pupils know what the good reading sounds like before they get to have a go. With echo reading, pupils repeat a sentence or a short section of the text after hearing it. And that supports the accurate decoding and phrasing. And with the choral reading, that's everyone practicing together, and that massively increases the amount of successful practice that's happening in the room. So these strategies, they're moving reading towards practice, not performance. They're helping the children to apply the phonics they're being taught, helping them build fluency, and you're freeing up cognitive space for comprehension as well. All this without putting them on the spot before they're ready. So the shift for us, it hasn't just been about what we teach in reading, it's been about how we give children chances to practice it. And once we started thinking of reading as practice rather than performance, then round robin reading, it just stopped making sense. If you want to really increase the volume of reading happening in your classroom, and I know a lot of classes already have quiet reading time after lunch, then fluency pairs is a really good strategy that's worth exploring too. The website, I think it's Reading Rockets, but definitely Nathaniel Swain. They've all got some great videos of different models of how to set up fluency pairs and what it can look like in practice. But the key thing's this, if you're already using echo reading and choral reading in your class, then fluency pairs is a very easy next step. So in fluency pairs, it's quite structured. The teacher chooses a short familiar text, and that keeps it efficient and also sets the children up for success. And then pupils work with a partner. So they take turns reading the same text aloud, they're listening closely, and they're supporting each other. So one child reads a small section while the other follows along, and then they swap. And often that second child rereads the same section again. So you're getting that built-in repetition. And we know that it's that repetition that builds fluency. What I really like about fluency pairs is that it dramatically increases the amount of meaningful reading that every child does. So everyone is reading, everyone's engaged, and the teacher can move around the room, giving that, that quick targeted feedback. So you can start with just a few minutes and you can quickly build that up over time. So these are just a few practical next steps if you're trying to move away from that round robin reading, if you're trying to increase reading volume in your class, and if you're trying to keep your approach aligned with explicit systematic instruction. So Geraldine, I'll try and quickly wrap this up now. So when I step back and look at this journey, so the data, the research, the changes in the classrooms, and the learning we're still doing, it's been really clear for us. This hasn't been about finding the perfect program or getting everything right straight away. We certainly haven't. It's been about being willing to look honestly at our practice, to listen what that evidence is telling us, and to change course when what we were doing wasn't serving all our children well. So explicit systematic phonics, it hasn't been a silver bullet, but it is giving us clarity, it's giving us consistency and a shared language. It's helping us build stronger foundations. We're reducing that guesswork, and we're giving children a genuine chance to become confident, fluent readers.